The Secret Agent is a 2025 neo-noir historical political thriller film written and directed by Kleber Mendonça Filho. It was shot on Panavision, Dee's favorite. It follows Armando, played by Wagner Moura, a former teacher that's caught up in the political turmoil of the final years of the Brazilian military dictatorship of the 1960s to the 1980s, who is attempting to flee persecution and resist an authoritarian, deceitful regime. So I'll talk very briefly through the narrative of the film. So in 1977, during the turmoil of the dictatorship, a former teacher, Armando, arrives in a place where he's being given refuge alongside other political refugees. Since the passing of his wife, Fatima, his son, Fernando, is being raised by his father-in-law. Meanwhile, at the same time, the corrupt chief of police, Euclides, and his sons are called in after a human leg is found inside a shark. The sons dispose of the human leg in the river, where you see this bizarre scene where it suddenly revives and attacks gay men cruising in a public park. This story, which is presumably a newspaper cover-up for the corruption going on, creates a public frenzy. Meanwhile, these hitmen have been hired by a former company president to kill Armando, who he has a vendetta with. The leader of the political resistance movement that Armando belongs to instructs him to flee the country because of all this imminent danger of all his various enemies, basically, and the dictatorship. Then some of those enemies hire a gunman to find him and kill him. Anticipating that he's going to need to escape, he says goodbye to all the other refugees, and then a shootout happens, but we don't see him die. Then at the end of the movie, in the present day, you see a history student researching the resistance network through old archives, and then she finds out that Armando was assassinated. Traveling back to where he was when all this happened, she meets with Fernando, his son, who is now a middle-aged doctor, also played by Wagner Moura, who agrees to be interviewed. Discussing the past and the murder, he says he doesn't have a single memory of his father or his own childhood during the time. That's the end of the film. D, was The Secret Agent good, bad, or mid?
I'm afraid The Secret Agent was mid. And the reason why is because it meanders for too long. I literally said here that the movie starts 1 hour, 40 minutes in. There were some unique circumstances around how I watched this film. So I watched it via screener and I ran out of time. I ran out of time like maybe hour and 30 minutes in. And I was only interested for the last 20 minutes of that. You know, if it wasn't for that, I probably wouldn't have requested an extension. Having said that, once you get past that hour and 10, it does become very thrilling. And, you know, I enjoyed seeing the chase down in the last 30 or 40 minutes or so. I always love watching, you know, Brazilian movies and seeing how diverse the country is. There's a lot of themes here with this movie as well, which I did enjoy. But I think there were too many characters and it meandered for just a bit too long for me. What do you think about The Secret Agent? Good, bad, or mid?
Mid. Far too long.
Yeah.
Far too long. I think this might have been the longest film that I watched at LFF. Way too long. This movie could have done exactly what it was trying to do in 83, 82 minutes max. Way too long. The reason I don't consider it bad, even though I had a very, very, very serious problem with caring about the story it was telling because of that length, was because I think it looks beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It is gorgeous. It looks like one battle after another, but more gorgeous to me.
Exactly.
It's so pretty. Just like with My Father's Shadow, all these like films that are being shot, actually Begonia as well, all these films being shot on Panavision and 16mm and 35mm, they're really out here doing the pretty shot on film thing. And it looks lovely. The period setting makes the different locations in South and Northeastern Brazil look really cool.
Yeah.
And I like how he uses language and flair and color, even if I wasn't even understanding the nuances of what was going on with language, but I know there were important points being made there with regionality of accents. But unfortunately, way too long for me to actually care about what they were talking about. You get to a point and I'm just like, I'm sorry, I've tapped out.
Let's get into the themes. First up, we have military. What do you think about how this film manages the depiction of the regime and military abuses?
Unfortunately, it's standing up against My Father's Shadow this year, which in my opinion shows the very like on the ground one-on-one perspective of a dictatorial military regime in the global south in the past in a lot more personable and to me even like aesthetically interesting way. So because I'm comparing it to that, Unfortunately, I wasn't that moved. I didn't really even understand what they were trying to say, apart from the generic idea of what a military dictatorship is. I didn't actually really understand the detail of what they were telling me specifically was happening in Brazil at that specific time.
Yeah, so I had a very similar experience to you. When I was watching it, I immediately saw parallels with My Father's Shadow in the sense that the film covers a father son relationship ultimately and military abuses and how that affects the father son relationship. They both kind of handled a brutal regime, but they don't center on it, which is fine. I do think that neither movie really gave me enough meat to understand what was going on with the regime. For example, if I think about Testament of Anne Lee, which is another historical movie, or it references like historical events, after that movie, I spent days digging into who is this person and what happened. This movie didn't really give me enough to do that. Like, I wouldn't even know where to start, really. And maybe it's just one of those films where they expect you to either have some degree of knowledge coming in or they expect you to go and do your research. But yeah, like, I don't feel like I know more about that time after watching the film, unfortunately.
I think this is one of those things where the circumstances through which I watch it does affect me. And in another time, maybe I would have had the time to really sit down and research Kleber Mendonça Filho's other work, including his previous movies. Because from my understanding, he does have a bit of a visual and storytelling language. And for the people that know, they know. And when you get it, you get it. So if you go into the film already understanding that, you pick up the points he's trying to make a bit better. But I didn't have any of that context. Another reason I think this is because when I spoke to him, of which we got the chance to speak to him and Wagner Moura at the premiere in London.
The film is made up of many different accents. Regional accents in Brazil, from São Paulo, from Recife, from
I think it's mentioned to one of the characters that they're like, you don't sound like you're from here.
Yeah. Exactly, yeah. And in the end, Wagner's character tells the young historian, "Are you from Minas?" Because of the way she speaks. So I really love the sound of many different ways of speaking the one language, which is the one language. And I love the two Angolans in the film. I love those two characters, and I love the way she speaks.
When I spoke to him, he was extremely intelligent, extremely detailed and specific and intentional with every single thing he said. And he wasn't caught unawares by anything anybody asked him. And this was even in English. I'm sure in Portuguese would have been even more rich, the kind of answers he was giving. So I think he's a very intelligent filmmaker and he's not interested in like kind of talking down to you. And unfortunately, if you're like us, we have zero context really of what they're actually talking about. And we didn't really have the time to really prep, quotes unquote. A lot of it can kind of wash over us. I found the inclusion of characters like the Angolan characters interesting, and I actually spoke to him about it. And it was stuff like that were intentional. The points he's trying to make about how these kind of dictatorships result after independence from your colonizer. There's stuff there. There's something there. I don't get it, but
Yeah.
there's probably something there.
Yeah, I could sense that the film was making some comments about colonialism and recovering from it. And of course, the link between Angola and Brazil is that they both were colonized by the Portuguese. But I just feel, yeah, I don't know. I feel like these ideas were just not very well hashed out for me.
Yeah, fair enough. I actually kind of struggle to really attach myself emotionally to any story they were telling about the family members, whether it was him
Mm.
and the son Fernando. This is Armando and his son Fernando, or his wife Fatima. I just
Mm.
didn't fully understand them as a family. At the end, when Wagner Moura pops back up as the grown-up version of his son, I giggled. And and I also found it interesting because in I'm Still Here last year, Fernanda Torres and her mother played the same character at different
Interesting.
stages in their life. And then here in The Secret Agent, you have Wagner Moura playing a father and his son at different stages in their life. And I actually asked him about it. I was like, is there something that Brazilian filmmakers are trying to say about generational trauma with making these kind of casting decisions? And he said yes, actually.
Mm.
Mm.
Okay.
What do you think about how these films are handling the themes of generational trauma and perseverance that exist for Brazilian people?
That's indeed a very good question because it is a trauma. It is a trauma that goes from generation to generation. You know, if we had in Brazil this horrible thing after the dictatorship, we had this thing called the amnesty law. And the amnesty law basically forgave all the torturers and killers and people that did despicable things with civilians during the dictatorship. And I think this film, The Secret Agent, is a lot about memory. As I'm still here, and we have to preserve our memories. And I think that, like I said, films are very important for that. We have to have our memories, and we come back to the theme of the truth. There are people in Brazil right now, young people, like 15, 16-year-old people that go like, "Oh, was there a dictatorship in Brazil? I didn't know that." So yeah, yeah, memory is a very important thing to avoid things to happen again.
Okay.
That in Brazil, people swallow their trauma and they pass it on without processing it generation to generation. So he doesn't think it's a coincidence that's happened in two times, but that this film was in production well before I'm Still Here came out. Anybody knew that casting was happening. So I found that interesting. What did you think about the ending?
I wanted to speak about Fatima and the family dynamic. So what I liked about Armando, Fatima, and obviously their son is, again, this is Brazil we're talking about. This is a country with very complicated race dynamics. The scene with Armando, Fatima, and, the man who's put a hit out on him in the future. What I liked about that scene is we see how, even in Brazil, that is a very, very complicated place racially. Black women are still getting the short end of the stick, right? So during the scene, the guy who's put the hit out, he goes out of his way to dehumanize Fatima, to imply that, you're just some fun toy for him. You're just a little black girl, sit down. So we see that Fatima is going through something that I'm sure I've been through it. I'm sure you've been through it. We know what it is to be a black woman in an academic space and have people not take you seriously. And I feel like this film does a really good job of depicting that. And another thing that this film does is it refers to Blancamiento. It was a really racist program that the Spanish and the Portuguese did in Brazil and the rest of Latin America. And the whole idea here was, after slavery, you have a big black population and they wanted to basically water them down so that they wouldn't revolt. And so this is where Blancamiento comes in, which literally means whitening, or like making the race more white. And there's a very famous portrait out of Brazil that documents this and portrays this. And at one point...
Did you say Argentina?
Yeah, but Argentina is the most extreme example for sure, but it still happened in Brazil as well. And I think Armando actually calls this out explicitly. It's actually in the ending scene where he's now playing his son, and he describes that Fernando's grandmother was Indian and his grandfather was of African descent. And the way how they describe that and beauty in there as well was very, very interesting. So yeah, I think I did get some insight into what it would have been like to be a mixed race couple in that period, and seeing that racism is very much a factor here. I think there was a certain fluency with how the film managed race, actually.
I wanted to speak about the acting. What did you think about the actors in the film? Including Wagner Moura, who won Best Actor at Cannes, and he's considered a favorite for the Oscars.
I think he was good. To be honest with you, for lead actor this year, it looks like Timothée Chalamet is a favorite, Leonardo DiCaprio is a favorite. They wouldn't get it from me. I would have Wagner Moura over them, but for me, my favorite actor this year is Jesse Plemons in Begonia. I do think that Wagner Moura was very good in this. I feel like he was fully believable. I did get the sense of panic and the sense of disorientation through him. I thought all of the performances were quite strong across the board, actually. What do you think?
It's really interesting because I felt like there was a very understated way he was performing throughout the film. Like, his character never fully boils over into explosion ever at any point. He has an almost flat way of speaking throughout. It's not a bad performance. It's a very controlled performance. But there were times I wanted him to lose it a bit more, but I understand that that's not the point of what that character is. I did think the performance was good, but maybe because I was just struggling with the general meandering length of the whole thing, it wasn't gripping me the way it seems to have gripped other people. I will say though, after meeting them in person, I am incredibly biased because that man is so attractive in real life. I was shook. He's extremely charming, both him and the director. Super, super charming in real life. And whenever people would bring up the Oscars or Cannes to them, you could tell they didn't want to get too hyped up, but they were so excited and it was so sweet. Congratulations again. We're rooting for you at the Oscars.
Lovely. Nice talking.
Considering I think this category is quite weak this year, I'm not mad. I will say everybody in the film feels very lived into the world.
Yes, I agree with that.
it almost looks like you're watching archival footage of them sometimes, which is pretty impressive.
I do have some positive things to say about the music. I quite enjoyed the score. And, you know, when we
Same.
think about when we think about Brazil, right, you think about, you know, the beautiful scenery, the beautiful people, and the wonderful music. If anything, I wanted more of it. I wanted more of it. Towards the second half, we did get a bit more. And I was grateful for that. And also, I just need to shout out something very quick. I am like Donna Summer's biggest fan. If you use Donna Summer in your movie, I'm gonna like it. And they used Donna Summer's Love to Love You Baby, and I was so happy when it came on. I was very gassed.
I did like that. I actually really, really enjoy the use of sound in general, not just music, but sound, scoring, and soundtrack music throughout the whole film. It put me in the mood, it put me in the vibe. Again, I think aesthetically this film is fantastic. Like it feels rich and colorful in the right ways. And some of those scenes where he's twisting and turning through the carnival happening made me think for the billionth time, I want to go to Brazil.
Something I really enjoyed about this movie was the handling of sex. I like the way how sex is not like sex happens and you just move on. And there's something that's very unique compared to so many American films and especially British films because British people don't really like to, you know, quite prudish. If we lived in a world that didn't have such weirdness when it comes to sex, that would be how sex appears in a film. Like it just happens. You're not zooming in on women. You're not doing any weird stuff. It just happens and you move on. Now, another movie that I think really handled sex very well during the London Film Festival was Pillion. Now, Pillion is far more explicit, but I appreciated it because it actually communicates something about the dynamic between the two. Admittedly, in this film, the sex has nothing to do with the dynamic between the two, but there was something about the way how it was depicted in such a, like, innocuous, like, it's just something that happens and you move on with your life. I really enjoyed it.
I felt like I didn't really understand much about that female character. I saw there's a moment where Elsa, who leads the resistance, she's kind of I think trying to set them up, and then later on we see them hooking up, and like you said, like we move on. I wasn't outraged by it, but I was like, I don't really understand what this character is. I wasn't up in arms about it. I was just like, oh, okay.
But don't forget the other sex scene, which is that crazy leg
dream
sequence. I don't know what it was. And again, it wasn't like fetishistic. Like I didn't feel like we are supposed to ogle at them. It was just like, what the hell's going on here? And then we move on. Okay.
It's supposed to be to satirize the kind of ludicrous things that the regime would come up with to cover up the criminal things that they were up to. So it's supposed to be bizarre way, like, what? What did you think about the use of like the masquerade figures from the carnival that were following him around?
So I actually have that in my notes. I don't know what they were supposed to be. Like, do you know what those characters are?
All I kept on thinking is they look straight out of Cross River in modern day Nigeria. They looked very, very West African to me, which makes sense, of course, Brazil.
They probably are.
Yeah. I would imagine that they represent this idea of like him being haunted by what he has lost or what he feels is ominously coming to him, but I can't really give you any more specific interpretation of it than that. I'm sure there are other people who are more culturally aware that would be.
Des, how would you rate The Secret Agent out of 10?
I would give it a 5.5. It looks gorgeous. It looks really, really beautiful. In terms of its finishing, one of my favorite films from the festival. I struggled with his running time. It's too long for me. I thought Wagner Moura was good, charming. I enjoyed him playing two different characters. I'm sure there's a lot of cultural context cues that I'm missing in this film, and I wish I had understood them more.
I would give The Secret Agent 5 out of 10. I think the last 40 minutes or so were really strong for me. So I was literally on the edge of my seat towards the end of it. Like I think they did a really good job of using tension, and also the soundtrack and the score in general really picks up at that point. So that all helped for me. I thought the performances were strong across the board. It's shot very well. It's very beautiful, and especially when the score kicks in, I really feel like I'm in the middle of Recife in Brazil. And I really did appreciate that. The film is too meandering for me in the first hour though, and that is a big part of the reason why I can't give a higher rating here. I also feel like Potentially it's my fault. I don't know. I don't have enough context to understand a lot of the storyline in this film. You know, when I get time, I guess I'll do some reading on it. But I don't think that the film helped me to understand necessarily what was going on politically at the time. But I do think that the film handles race very well. I like the storyline with Fatima and Armando, and also the handling of intergenerational trauma.
Here's a little more from my conversation with Kleber Mendonça Filho and Wagner Moura.
It's the second time that I use Panavision lenses. The first time was with Bacurau 7 years ago. And I love those pieces of glass. They have a history. We shot with the E series, which is late 60s, early 70s. They have a very specific look, which is actually quite different from the modern look. The modern lenses are, to my taste, too sharp and too perfect.
Isabel Zuaa, who plays Teresa, she makes a comment about how she's insistent she's not going to enter a plane with the Portuguese flag. And and I was just kind of thinking about, how are you thinking about the Portuguese-speaking diaspora in general? Because, of course, the film is set in Brazil, but that character is included as an Angolan as you were making the film. And what kind of point of view were you trying to represent with that kind of character?
It all begins with Teresa Vitória, who was a good friend of my mother's. And I have childhood memories of Teresa Vitória, but she was from Mozambique. And I wrote the character as someone from Mozambique, Teresa Vitória. But then when Isabél Zuaa came into the film, and she's the daughter of Angolans, I changed the character for Angolans.
So I know you've said recently that democracy is doing great right now in Brazil, and in your way, you see that as connected to the recent success with arts and film in Brazil.
I really, this is a very personal opinion. Maybe some people don't agree with me, but I think that every sort of art is political. I think everything is political. I think that it's like maybe some comedies that you don't really think is just for entertainment or for fun. The time that they make you change something inside yourself in your spirit, it's political in my opinion. And but I myself like political films, and I directed another film about the dictatorship called Marighella, and and I think it's important. I think it's important, especially in everywhere in the world. And you see the U.S. being a country that you see, it's so surprising how, maybe not that surprising, but how authoritarianism is escalating in a country like that. But in other places where people are seeing their countries being taken by seeing democracy like being on a spot, like being like seeing journalism on the spot, seeing that scares. Like, you know what scares me most? The idea that the truth as we know it is over. You know, that scares the shit out of me. And I think that somehow movies have these capacity of like putting a mirror in front of us. Sometimes the mirror is distorted. Sometimes the mirror is like exactly what we're seeing, like in documentaries or things like that. But I think this is important to make us think